So this is a strange place to meet a government minister. Where are we?
Right here, right under our feet, there's a natural gas pipeline that is packed with gas that is flowing from the United States into Atlantic Canada.
And why would Mark Carney be interested in this?
This is a nation-building project that checks every box. We have
out in this clearing by the side of the Trans-Canada Highway, just outside Fredericton, New Brunswick, this natural resources minister sees opportunity to unite the country west to east. He wants to see a new pipeline bringing Alberta's natural gas here via Quebec rather than through New England.
So the poetry kind of goes like this, where you have Western Canada gas going into Ontario through the province of Quebec, adding additional pipe from Quebec City into Atlantic Canada. That additional pipe, aspirationally speaking, would be made of Ontario steel that could terminate in St. John, where that gas is shipped to new markets that create economic and political interdependence.
So with the extension of the line from Quebec City, we go around the United States. We're cutting out the United States from the flow of this gas.
That's exactly it. This is a made-in-Canada solution. This is energy sovereignty.
On Friday, as Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney once again pledged to develop nation-building projects. And this pitch for energy sovereignty is just one of a network of ideas he may choose for fast-track approval and possible federal funding. I'm Jacques Poitras, sitting in for Catherine Cullen. And this week on The House, will the ambitious Eastern Energy Partnership recharge the economy and help tie the country together? This special edition of The House in Fredericton is now in session.
So strengthening the interties and the transmission components between Nova Scotia, PEI, Quebec, and the U.S. is fundamental. And then the net new generation capacity lets us address our own decarbonization and economic development initiatives and sell power to other people who need it. And then you get into the diversification of generation, and that's where the natural gas pipeline comes in.
As New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt explains it, the Eastern Energy Partnership involves 5 provinces, all of Atlantic Canada and Quebec. The proposal is to upgrade transmission lines to expand their capacity and toughen them up so they can move electricity from new energy-generating projects. And that's where we focus today, on the big ideas for wind, nuclear, and natural gas. New Brunswick Minister John Herron is here at a Regional Assembly of First Nations meeting at a Fredericton hotel to pitch his part of the plan to New Brunswick's Wolastoqey and Mi'kmaq chiefs.
We all get a little bit romantic when we talk about how we built a railroad from coast to coast. This is a chance for us to be able to make a project that actually creates wealth, economic development, new opportunities for every single region of the country, and also for communities or nations that have been left out from the economic development for large-scale projects, in this case by having First Nation participation.
But across the country, Mark Carney's legislation to fast-track projects deemed in the national interest, that's Bill C-5, has angered and alarmed some First Nations. Here in New Brunswick, the regional AFN chief is ready to talk.
I invited the province to come and present to the chiefs what their vision is and when in the energy sector here for New Brunswick, so that our chiefs are fully informed on where the province wants to go and get ready for whatever negotiations that they may be looking to do.
Joanna Bernard is a former chief of the Madawaska Maliseet First Nation, known for her business savvy. And she's bringing that same sensibility to the province's pitch for projects of national interest.
The First Nations have announced that a lot of wind energy, even some of the First Nations are looking at the nuclear prospect. LNG, I don't know, but they're open to it. And we're open to hearing it and just making sure that whatever happens is we're thinking of the environment, the future, and ownership. There's no, back in the days, it was here's some scholarship or here's some capacity building so maybe your people can work on the pipeline. Those days are gone. We're going to own part of the company. We're going to be there on the grounds, making sure environmental issues are of the highest priority, and the profits will go to the First Nations. Their portion will be divided among the First Nations, and the chiefs haven't decided what that would look like, but at the end of the day, it's all about being partners and owners in these ventures.
And that's an absolute for you?
That's for me, but I'm not all the New Brunswick chiefs. It's just my opinion here. It should be that way.
Is there a consensus among the chiefs on this?
Well, I'm not 100% sure where everyone is, because there's 15 of them, but I know that there's interest and the potential for economic benefits for our First Nation. You know, they took over $80 billion of forestry from us, not giving us a penny. And the province has received those royalties for the stumpage fees for forestry. Those are the days that, never again will that happen. It's going to be our natural resources is going to be part of our businesses that we undertake.
Minister John Herron insists First Nations involvement is part of the whole government's plan, something the province could even require of the private sector companies who line up to build some of those projects.
To be very clear, in this province, on these types of large projects, there is no path forward without robust, iterative engagement with our First Nations and participation. And I would suggest that comes in the form of equity. So on an individual project, I think the highest form of consultation and accommodation is ownership. And so then it's an iterative process that they truly are at the table at every step in the process of a development of a project.
So does that mean no provincial sign-off unless a proponent is willing to do that?
We haven't developed the framework itself just yet, but I would envision something of that ilk.
Chief Terry Richardson from Pabineau First Nation, in traditional Mi'kmaq territory on the province's North Shore, is enthusiastic about pretty much every nation-building project New Brunswick is putting forward, from the gas pipeline extension to nuclear power. He met with Mark Carney the day before we spoke, so I asked him if he had a sense of what the Prime Minister is thinking.
There's been no commitment from obviously the Prime Minister yet on what projects he's looking at. Obviously, the three that the Premier of New Brunswick has put forward are the gas pipeline, extending it from Quebec into New Brunswick and possibly down to Nova Scotia. Then we have the Port of Belledune for critical minerals, could be a hub. And then, of course, small modular nuclear reactor technology. So those are the three I think the Premier have been pushing. I think they're three great nation-building projects. I think there's great opportunity there. My take on the Prime Minister is he hasn't made a commitment to any project yet, but I think he is looking at SMNR technology when you look at the North. Obviously, to deploy, when you look at the energy sector and energy security in the North, food security in the North, you're looking at probably $30,000 a kilowatt to produce energy up north. So SMNR technology does make sense in that realm.
There's a lot of concern about nuclear power, as you know, a lot of opposition. Why do you like nuclear? Why are you okay with it?
I'm okay with it because we need a solution. We need a baseline source of energy, and right now we don't have any. I mean, renewables are great. But what do you do when the wind don't blow, the sun don't shine, and the water don't flow? I mean, then renewables are gone. So we need that baseline source of energy, and the one that we have that's there right now in the province of New Brunswick is nuclear. Ontario as well. So, and you see a lot of the other provinces now, Ontario, or Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, they're all looking nuclear now because they realize that has to be part of the solution.
Now, the federal government wants these projects to move fast. They want approvals fast. The courts have laid out all these markers for duty to consult Indigenous communities. So how do those things work together in your mind?
We're still, the Prime Minister and the Premiers of all the provinces have made a commitment that there will still be consultation. Environmental issues will still be addressed. I think from a First Nation perspective, they just don't want that to move too fast. So I can see that. No, neither would anybody else, I believe, in the country. So, we just still do our due diligence, move those projects forward, and keep moving down that line.
Is there a consensus, though, among First Nations in Atlantic Canada about how fast or how slow or how much to consult?
I think I'll be able to tell you more this afternoon when we have our meeting with the ministers in regards to energy. But I think, I think there's a willingness to move on these projects. We all know there's an importance, especially with our neighbor to the south not being so neighborly anymore. And we have to open up other markets. That's the reality. We're in a situation now, it's a changing world. People say, he's just joking when he says we're going to be the 51st state. I don't think he's joking. I think he wants us to be the 51st state. And, there's a realization what we have and what the United States needs. So I think we have to hold strong. And the only way we're going to do that is by uniting as a country, First Nations, French, English, immigrants right across this country. We've got to unite and make Canada strong.
Why is there so much support, like from you and from others here, where we're seeing in Ontario, for example, a lot of First Nations have raised real concerns about the speed of this potential approval process?
Well, that's a really good question, but I have a feeling that there's more of a consensus to move on these projects with chiefs across Canada. I would almost go with a 75-25 for development, obviously not circumventing the environmental issues and the concerns that would go with the duty to consult. I think that is the key. I think a lot of, when you look at the provinces that are instituting their own bills, that's causing the issue. Because within those bills, there's even more, I guess I would say, willingness to not engage. And that's the scariness of it. So I think, from New Brunswick, we haven't made that. We'll be meeting with the province shortly with some of the ministers, and we'll get more of an understanding of where, we can go and develop that path forward together.
If these projects happen, if some of these projects happen, what's that mean for the economy of your community?
Well, I think it's listen, I always say if First Nations prosper, the province and the country prospers. Because let's be realistic, all First Nation money is spent in this province or in this country. And, as we make money, we're helping the economy grow. We don't have offshore bank accounts where we store our money. We spend the money in the province and we help the economy grow. And I think that's what's, the expectation for us is to become obviously equity partners. We would love to see more equity opportunity. That's where the real growth is for First Nations. And then we can address our shortfalls in housing.
How important is that? Is that a bottom line for you, a red line?
It is. I think it really is. Equity is what I'm looking for because it allows us to address the shortfalls that we have in our communities in regards to housing, health. I don't want to be a ward of the state for the rest of my life. I want to rely on our own economy and our First Nation economy to address our First Nation concerns and be able to use our money to address those concerns. So I think that's important for us.
Okay, Chief Terry Richardson, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's remarkable that New Brunswick even has a nuclear station when you think about the size of the province. And we couldn't do it alone. We actually have a partnership with PEI around the nuclear plant. And when you think
nuclear power has been humming in the background in New Brunswick for more than 40 years. The province has the only nuclear reactor operating in the country outside Ontario. And as part of the Eastern Energy Partnership, Premier Susan Holt is pitching more nuclear, whether that's small modular reactors or a second large-scale CANDU reactor next to the existing reactor at Point Lepreau. According to New Brunswick Power Vice President Brad Cody, new power generation is needed because of record population growth in the region driving up demand. Some days, like what happened on February 4th, 2023, the whole grid and every one of NB Power's generating stations are put to the test.
We had what we call a polar vortex, so it's not a localized issue, right? So when it gets cold in New Brunswick, it's cold in Montreal, it's cold in Boston, it's cold in Halifax. My goodness, it was cold in St. John's that day too. So what happens is a very cold air mass moved down, and the entire northeast was under this cold weather, and it causes all of the power needs to start to ramp up. New Brunswick in particular, we don't use a lot of natural gas or oil for heating, so we needed a lot of electric space heat those days, and we found all of our neighbors needed all of their power sources as well, and it really left us with the inability to import any energy from our neighbors. So every generator in New Brunswick came on that weekend, and it stayed on the entire weekend. So this isn't something that you can solve with variable wind products. Those days, they didn't perform very well at all for us. And what happened was it was so cold and so windy that those devices couldn't produce. So we had to rely on more traditional fossil fuel sources to come on to help regulate and keep the lights on, and more importantly, to heat on for New Brunswickers that day.
But was the province close to a real problem? Yeah,
when you plan your power systems, it's really important that we can never guarantee 100% reliability, right? Like it's not something we can plan for. So we had every single generator on, and every single generator was facing challenges. But we designed a system to get through those types of events, and that day it was close, but we got through it. That's exactly what good planning suggests was occurring.
Close to what?
Close to running out of power in New Brunswick.
You talked to a committee at the legislature a couple of years ago about what the situation would be if Lepreau did not exist.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. When I joined NB Power back about 10 years ago, I started to study how did the nuclear plant actually happen here. And if we didn't have it, if we didn't make those bold moves in the late 1970s, it's very likely our next plant, which was Belledune, a coal-fired plant, would have been actually closer to 2,000 megawatts.
What does 2,000 megawatts mean?
2,000 megawatts will be about 4 times the coal, so 4 times the emissions from coal-fired power in New Brunswick today. It would be a much bigger problem for us to figure out how do we decarbonize if we started from that point.
When you look out, 5 to 10 years and nuclear options, there's talk of a second CANDU at LaPro, SMRs. Like what's looking most likely? What's looking good now? What's looking less good?
Regional partnerships, I think, are key to, what I'll call big new nuclear. So if it's, several nuclear plants or one large CANDU or something like that, I think we really need to say, how do we do nation building with our partners? Again, Point LaPro exists today with a partnership with PEI. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about when we say, how do we achieve a regional solution or a nation building solution? Is how do we partner together to have those win-wins?
Do partners include the U.S.?
Yeah, I think outside of the politics, if I could keep the politics to the sidelines here right now, that's not my lane. We figure out how do we work together to minimize costs for the region, right? So if a day like today, maybe we could be exporting power and helping somebody offset a higher source of generation that they don't need in their province or their state. And on other days, maybe they have a surplus and we can actually buy it and displace power that would be more costly to produce in New Brunswick. That's the magic of the interconnections that we have with our neighbors.
We're here overlooking the Mactaquac Dam. How important is this dam to the system?
The Mactaquac Dam is the heartbeat for the Maritimes. So hydro is very nimble, very flexible. It can very quickly react to either rising demand or falling demand. So as New Brunswickers, Nova Scotians, Islanders over in PEI wake up and start their days, you can see demand very quickly start to rise. Well, the output from Mactaquac will keep up with that demand. As we get through the peak in the morning period and people start going off to work and shutting down their households for the day, for example, demand actually starts to fall down. And we use Mactaquac like a battery. So we have a head pond behind you, Jacques. We charge that every single night to get ready for the morning. The water rolls through. The water fills up. Water fills up, just like charging your phone overnight. You start using it. You use it very hard in the mornings to get through the day, the peak. And then we slow down. I know that's not the technical term. We slow down production at Mactaquac to, again, recharge that head pond to get ready for the evening rush. We do that day in, day out.
This is a cut. This cover is a temporary cover that covers a cut that's been moving since the 80s. So I'm going to remove a cover just to show you.
The dam may be the heartbeat of the region, but it has a problem. A chemical reaction is expanding its concrete. To relieve pressure, NB Power makes precise, controlled cuts in the structure, so they can control how and where the concrete expands. Dam manager Greg Carroll shows us the damage.
This was actually cut to allow the concrete to expand in the powerhouse.
This is a deliberate cut.
This was a deliberate cut.
As we look up the wall of the dam, we can see small cuts where water is flowing through.
Expansion. You can imagine this massive structure growing in different directions, right? So when you see the water leaking through the structure, those are cuts that we made in the past. Water is migrating through those cuts.
And why are we seeing more water on some than on others?
Some of those cuts are older than others, and some of those cofferdams haven't been sealed up as timely as others. So we need to have divers go in the water, so we have to do that during low flows. We have to have outages, depending on the system conditions in the province. It's hard to get those outages to put divers in the water. So we try to do that on a regular basis. Every couple of years, go in and seal them up. But to your point, yeah, some are leaking worse than others, and that could be a product of expansion too. This area could be expanding a little bit more, so it's opening up those crevices to allow water to come through those cracks.
Do you ever feel like you're sort of, like the saying goes, fixing the plane in midair while it's flying?
Yeah.
Carroll says the dam is safe, but that takes work and costs money. While it's not being pitched as part of the Eastern Energy Partnership, the $9 billion upgrade to this hydroelectric wonder is another item on the province's must-do list.
There is no do-nothing option.
Lori Clark is NB Power's CEO. She has to keep one eye on Mactaquac, one eye on nuclear, while also juggling the utility's huge debt and trying to keep a lid on power rates. For Clark, the Eastern Energy Partnership represents not just a way to get projects done faster, but maybe also a chance for an injection of federal cash.
We will be stronger together, working together. And I do really believe that the federal government has a role to play in this as well. They've set the deadlines for net zero. And when you think about big projects, like whether it's the Trans-Canada Highway, whether it's Sea and Rail, whether it's Air Canada, the federal government has always had a part to play in those to make them successful. And I do think that there is an opportunity for the provinces to lean in. And I think the federal government helping will make this part of the province, the energy infrastructure, more robust. And when I think about New Brunswick, we have some of the lowest rates, but some of the highest bills. So real affordability challenge for New Brunswickers, and anything we can do to offset any significant rate increases in the future, or keep rates as low and stable for New Brunswickers, and also ensure that we have the generation and the reliability that customers need. Really important that we do that for New Brunswickers.
And so do you mean federal money by that? Maybe for a new nuclear plant or Mactaquac or
federal
something
help,
else?
yes, and that could come in the form of money. But it's we definitely will need some help from the federal government. We have one of the highest levels of energy poverty in Canada.
Premier Holt has said that a second nuclear plant at Point Lepreau is on her wish list. And NP Power has been working on small modular reactors for years. Is a second large reactor part of your wish list as well?
We are continuing to explore all options with nuclear. So we're continuing to watch what's happening with small modular reactors, and also looking at what CANDU or other technologies have to offer.
First of a kind can be expensive. Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yes, first of a kind comes with some benefits, but it also comes with some risks. And I'd rather watch jurisdictions like Ontario and see how they do with a larger customer base to share costs over. And we do expect the technology to get cheaper as you get to the first, second, third, fourth, whatever. So we're looking and watching eagerly because we do see nuclear as an important part of our future.
Up next on the House podcast, The Green Point of View. Stay with us. I'm Jacques Poitras, guest hosting a special edition of The House. It's been a hot week in many parts of Canada, no different here in Fredericton. As we enter the office of Green Party leader David Coon, he and a staffer are adjusting the air conditioning.
It's not on,
it
right?
Is. It is.
It hasn't been kicking in. It's on?
It is.
Like set at what?
24.
24.
Coon understands the increased demand for energy, but says Premier Susan Holt's proposal for a second nuclear power plant in New Brunswick is not the way to go.
It's insane. We all get nuclear power bills of a size that no one is happy with because of the extremely expensive costs of owning a nuclear power plant, and all the repairs that you have to do on it, and the expensive power you have to buy to replace it when its power when it's down. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We know now around the world that the cheapest sources of electricity are renewable with storage by far. And so this is a fool's game.
Well, she says it's the cheapest power to generate.
Yeah, well, she's not telling the whole story. If all you're looking at is the cost of the uranium, sure. But as we know, you actually need a power plant to turn that uranium into energy and run a power plant. And that kind of power plant is extremely expensive, constantly needs upkeep and repairs, has a huge workforce, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I mean, it's the most expensive form of electricity all in that they're going. It's like, a Lamborghini is cheap if you look at the price of gasoline, and that's all you have to worry about paying for.
But there is the importance of getting emissions down. And is there a cost point for nuclear that makes it worth it if it gets emissions down, even if we have to pay more?
It's never going to be there. The costs, which are affordable, are for renewable sources of energy, solar, wind, hydroelectricity, and storage, and managing energy demand. So that's where your savings are. That's where your most economical options are. And we need to transition to that kind of a system away from one that she envisions and her predecessors envisioned is to continue to be based on a nuclear anchor for the foreseeable future.
Do you think Mark Carney will say yes to a second LaPro?
No, he won't say yes. I mean, it's too much money. Why would he throw money down a nuclear hole when it's not nation building, like building a nuclear power plant? It's like we built one before.
Well, she said it generates some electricity that's exportable that can go to other provinces.
We've been exporting electricity for years. So it's just, will you pay Mr. Carney, Mr. Prime Minister, please, for our next power plant is what that's all about. And NB Power is quite happy to have the cost of acquiring another nuclear power plant taken off their hands or off their what would become debt and covered by the federal government. This happened with Point LaPro originally back in the 70s, that New Brunswick tried to get the feds to pay for it, and they refused, and then they tried to get all the other maritime provinces to throw in, and that fell apart. And so, why? Because it's so expensive, and so we bared the entire cost.
What do you make of Premier Holt's talk of a gas pipeline extending from Quebec City to the northern New Brunswick and then down into southern New Brunswick to connect with Maritimes and Northeast?
Well, as the International Court of Justice just concluded, countries like Canada, other countries, should not be engaging in these kinds of new fossil fuel infrastructure projects because of the climate breakdown we're facing and the consequences, the very real consequences that are already being widely felt by people and by the natural systems that support people. That's not making the transition away from fossil fuels. We need to make the transition away from fossil fuels. That's just perpetuating dependence. It's like saying, well, what if we replace the cocaine, the crack here, let me think about this, the crystal meth you're on with crack cocaine? Well, how's that help? Not much. So, we need to really dig in as a national project to make this transition. This is building a nation for the rest of this century, for our children, for their children, where we actually do make the transition away from fossil fuels. And all the pieces around how we do transportation differently, how we produce and utilize energy differently, how we produce our products and do our work, all of those things will be influenced in one way or another. This is nation building. It's building a nation for the 21st century, not for the 20th century.
Okay. David Kuhn, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Next door in Nova Scotia, there's a big energy plan that, if realized, might give a major boost to that transition away from fossil fuels. Premier Tim Houston is pitching a project called Wind West as his contribution to the Eastern Energy Partnership. Here's Houston in a breezy social video he released in June.
What if Nova Scotia could power up to 27% of Canada's electricity needs? Stop and think about that. That would make Nova Scotia an energy superpower. Sounds like a stretch, right? Well, it's not.
Well, it's not a slam dunk either. Houston's concept would require 4,000 wind turbines in a very windy area of the ocean off the shore of Nova Scotia to generate massive amounts of electricity to transmit westward.
It might seem difficult doing big marine operations, but it's something we've been doing in countries like Denmark, Germany, and the UK for 30-some years.
Scott Urquhart is the Nova Scotia-born CEO of a wind energy tech company based in Denmark. He says the province has a lot of potential because it's just so windy.
In Nova Scotia, we have sites with up to 10.5 meters per second, and that's pretty much best in the world. It's better than what we have in Denmark and Germany, where a lot of the sector was founded, and it's on par with a lot of the best sites in the United Kingdom.
But while Wind West is doable, Urquhart says maybe not on the timeline Mark Carney wants.
It takes longer offshore. In general, the development and permitting timelines offshore are much longer, and the typical timeline from getting a site to actually having turbines spinning can be about 10 years.
There's also the cost. Tim Houston puts it at $5 to $10 billion, a figure Nova Scotia energy consultant Heidi Leslie doesn't buy.
The estimate is really low. So the best, closest example we have is the most recent offshore wind auction in New York, which was 15 cents US a kilowatt hour, which is about, let's just say, 21 cents Canadian a kilowatt hour. And to give you context, in Ontario, the delivered cost of energy is about 13 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour.
So you're losing money on every kilowatt.
You're losing money on every kilowatt. They're delivering very expensive energy. And then the farther away it is from the place that's using it, the more expensive it is, because you need to build the transmission to get it there.
Houston wants to sell this power to provinces west of here, though he's willing to sell to the U.S. if the price is right.
You can't export clean power without a way to move it.
The next challenge is transmission.
We need a cable, ideally along a national energy corridor, to deliver that wind energy westward across Canada.
Tim Houston's video devotes just 12 seconds to transmission, with a graphic of a line zipping out of the ocean, across Nova Scotia, through New Brunswick, and then west to the rest of Canada. Here's what he told Power and Politics in June.
We'll let the engineers figure out the exact route, but most likely an overland route through New Brunswick and connecting into Hydro-Quebec, into Ontario, and onto markets.
It's not realistic at all.
Larry Hughes is an energy expert at Dalhousie University in Halifax.
Our grid is certainly not prepared for that. We have enough problems with reliability issues. There is a strengthening of the grid between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but that will certainly not be enough to handle what is required.
Besides the need to multiply transmission capacity several times over, Hughes sees other challenges, like the supply chain needed to build 4,000 turbines, and how they'd stand up to increasingly frequent extreme weather in the region.
It's more than simply a case of, we're going to plop some turbines in and lay some cables and off we go. This is going to be a huge project, which can be done, but it's just politicians do have this habit of grabbing onto things and running with them. And as we've seen in Nova Scotia over the past, we've had oil, we've had natural gas, offshore natural gas. We've had wind turbine industries, we've had tidal power, we've had hydrogen. Now we're on to this.
Still, despite technical and financial concerns, wind boosters say small projects could pave the way for bigger ambition.
There could be potential for doing a smaller, what we call a frontier type project to get the sector started. And of course, that could be done on shorter timelines, and it doesn't require large offshore transmission upgrades or things like that.
We're going to need energy for the long run, and our electricity needs just continue to go up. So people may want things fast, and there will be some fast projects across the country, but you also have to start early in order to ever get it done.
So we've looked at some of the key elements of the Eastern Energy Partnership. Wind West, a second nuclear plant, a gas pipeline extension down from Quebec. But what's the likelihood Prime Minister Mark Carney will choose some or all of them to fast-track? Time to ask the Premier of New Brunswick, Susan Holt.
Premier Holt, the Prime Minister is going to have to start choosing which projects of national interest to support. And the Eastern Energy Partnership is kind of an umbrella for a number of things. So why should he choose the projects in that group?
Well, what we're putting in front of the Prime Minister here in New Brunswick, because we have what the world wants and we have what Canada needs, is an interconnected energy system with projects that are ready to go, some of which can move really quickly. We've talked about the PEI to New Brunswick cabling that'll allow PEI to develop more wind, us to continue to supply them with the base power that they need. That's good for our two provinces. The connections with Nova Scotia and up to Quebec help strengthen the redundancy and resiliency of our energy systems on Canada's path to be an energy superpower. So it aligns with the Prime Minister's priorities. We're pretty nimble out here. We're all aligned as the Atlantic provinces on this priority, and we're going to be able to make it happen pretty quickly.
You've talked about adding a second reactor at Point Lepreau to add to that base load. CANDU reactor there, as you know, has turned out to be very expensive. It was expensive to build and maintain and refurbish. So how are you sure that won't happen again with a new reactor?
That's a good question because I can't predict the future. But what I can tell you is that New Brunswick has been in nuclear power for more than 40 years. Le Pro was the first nuclear generator in Canada. A lot of lessons have been learned since then, and we've watched as Ontario has built out more and more nuclear generators that have gotten better and better, more and more efficient, more and more reliable. So the technology today is better than it was 40 years ago when Le Pro came into place, and it's proving to provide some of the most cost-effective power in other jurisdictions, and New Brunswick has an advantage here. If you wanted new nuclear in Alberta or even in Ontario, the process to get that identified, to get the permits to develop nuclear in a new place, that's a lengthy process. We have a site ready right beside where an existing nuclear power facility has been approved. So we're already at the starting line, whereas other jurisdictions have a lot of work to do to get there. So I think the next full-scale nuclear in Canada is going to get built in New Brunswick.
You say it's cost effective, but David Kuhn says that is just the generation, the uranium. When you factor in maintenance and outages and replacement power and everything else, it's actually been very expensive.
Well, I think the economists are fighting over that one because every day I seem to see a new report that says this is the lower cost of power, this is the lower cost, depending on what you include as the investments and the external costs related to whether it's wind or solar or biomass or hydrogen or coal, or those numbers seem to shift.
Or maybe it's depending on what you're advocating for?
Well, it also depends on who your partners are. So one of the benefits to this project is that we have a number of people interested in partnering in nuclear power. We have a federal government interested in partnering in nuclear power, people ready to put money into it to defray the cost to New Brunswickers and to make sure that we're not putting that burden on ratepayers. Because at the bottom line for this, for me, is ever since I've become Premier, New Brunswickers have been making it very clear that they need affordable energy. And every day we are laser focused on how we can deliver the most affordable energy possible. And with that means the cleanest energy possible and the most reliable energy possible. So when I'm trying to deliver affordability for New Brunswickers, I'm looking at who's shouldering the burden with us. How do we reduce the cost to New Brunswick ratepayers while still pursuing our objectives of clean power and reliable power? We need all three of those things. But to me, New Brunswickers have made it very clear affordability is number one. And that's why the whole government is laser focused on what we need to do to the energy system to deliver affordable power to New Brunswickers.
When you say federal partnering, do you mean financially and to what extent?
Yeah, we're absolutely looking to the federal government to partner with us.
Have they made any commitments about that?
We're still working on all of the different pieces of proponents, partners, who might build it, who's going to benefit from it. A lot of our neighboring provinces want the stability that a nuclear baseload provides. There's very few other sources of power that run consistently 24/7 in ways that you can predict and you can predict the price of. So that stability is really helpful, not only to us, to Nova Scotia, to PEI, to Quebec, and to the United States.
We've talked to a few people this week about the idea of extending the gas line, the natural gas line from Quebec City into northern New Brunswick and down to connect to the existing line. Yeah. And we've heard from First Nations chiefs who want equity in that project. Is that something you support?
Absolutely.
And what would that look like?
Well, we have to put together the project of who's going to sort of own and operate the pipeline and what would be the equity stake for First Nations in the development and ownership and tolling on that pipeline. So there's obviously a revenue component in there, an investment to get it built, and we have already had the conversations starting with First Nations about being a partner and an equity owner in that kind of project.
Is there a private sector proponent for that extension?
There's certainly folks who want to sell us gas, and we have industry and customers that want access to natural gas. It's going to help us decarbonize. It's going to help us with economic development goals, two things that are pretty important. We want to be able to grow our economy, and we want to grow our economy with less emissions intensity. You would have seen that was one of our measures at the State of the Province. So we're working with the folks that have natural gas capacity, because Canada has a lot of it, who want more customers in the east, and figuring out the mechanics of the cost of the pipeline and who's committed to buying what over a 20-year plan. But look at the cost of natural gas in Alberta. I think it's 38 cents right now. That's really attractive to New Brunswickers who are looking for affordable sources of energy.
Is there a potential role for a government to have an ownership stake in that project if it's needed?
Potentially.
And would that be federal government, provincial government?
Look, this is why we're having the conversation with the federal government. It's a part of the Eastern Energy Partnership, because if we're talking about projects in the national interest, we're talking about breaking down internal trade barriers and finding Canadian customers for our own resources. Why wouldn't Eastern Canadians benefit from Western Canadian resources? And why wouldn't we create those connection points that let us trade with ourselves more than we trade with the U.S.? And so I think there's a lot of people who have an interest in that kind of energy independence, the kind of interprovincial trade of energy that we'd like to see more of.
The federal government only has so much money, and not all of these projects are going to get approved. So is New Brunswick in any way in competition with, say, Nova Scotia on something like Wind West or other provinces in the region to get one of the yeses out of Mark Carney?
Well, because Wind West is a part of the Eastern Energy Partnership, and it works when the interties and the connections are there for them to provide that power through New Brunswick and on to other end customers, they're one and the same, right? We're all advocating for the advancement of the Eastern Energy Partnership.
So is it all or nothing?
It's not all or nothing because of the time scale, right? The Wind West project has a long timeline. To build offshore wind takes a lot of investment, a lot of environmental approvals, identifying those sites, building some pretty significant infrastructure that is going to take years. It'll take longer than cabling to PEI will, but maybe a similar amount of time as a nuclear generation facility would take. Not as long as a natural gas pipeline might take from Quebec down and connecting into the existing infrastructure. So we're looking at which ones can move quickly. So the faster projects are going to be the ones that get through. I think the Prime Minister has said there's a 2-year window on this, right? So we've got to get projects developed, proponents identified, and the first ones in the door, the ones that can move quickly, are the ones most likely to get supported.
So
but we're all supporting each other in Atlantic Canada. I want Nova Scotia to be successful in development of wind, and we're supporting that project because Atlantic Canada has a long history of working together in an integrated way with our electricity systems, and steps in that direction where we're more integrated, more resilient and redundant is a good thing for New Brunswick, for PEI, for Nova Scotia, for Quebec, for Newfoundland.
So no elbows up with Tim Houston?
No. Tim and I share the same interests. We want to see federal investment in the Eastern Energy Partnership. We want to see them supporting the net new generation in this region and the transmission that supports getting that generation to the people who need it.
One of the dilemmas in this whole Canada-US discourse and in energy is that in the energy sector, often the closest customer is the best customer. And so in our case, that is New England more so than, say, Ontario. Mm-hmm. If some of these projects rely on the US market, like Wind West or like a second CANDU, how is that nation building?
Well, I think for us, actually, in looking at a new CANDU, it's to support the growth in demand in Atlantic Canada and Eastern Canada, right? Well, there's growth in demand everywhere, and we need strong baseload power that's non-emitting to support economic development. So our first customer is ourselves and is Canada. But having that stability gives us the opportunity to then wheel more intermittent power into the U.S. at a higher rate. And so we end up taking better margin from them that helps keep the cost to New Brunswickers down, because that's our ultimate goal. If we can deliver affordable power to New Brunswickers because we have the U.S. paying more for intermittent power, then that's a win for New Brunswickers. That gets back to what I was saying before. Ultimately, we need affordable, sustainable, and clean power for New Brunswickers, and the U.S. might be a funder of that, right?
But that ties us closer to the U.S. or keeps us tied to the U.S. at a time when we're trying to also do energy sovereignty in Canada.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? We like the tourism season. We like money from outsiders being invested in our province, but we can't rely on it solely. So we have to be able to operate our energy systems in a way that are affordable to New Brunswickers without a large dependence on the U.S. or on another jurisdiction. And so having the U.S. there as a great customer that you can serve when you need to is better than having them be one that we couldn't afford to lose.
Okay, Premier Holt, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Jacques.
That's the pitch from here in Atlantic Canada. Soon it'll be up to the feds to choose. I asked Nova Scotia MP Sean Fraser, the minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, whether he's advocating for the whole package of ideas that make up the Eastern Energy Partnership. Here's part of that conversation.
Certainly, I would like to see the different components of these projects come to fruition. I think that's the obvious when you're dealing with a series of renewable energy generation and transmission projects that will create thousands upon thousands of jobs. But I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. To the extent we have an opportunity to move more quickly on good projects that have buy-in from Indigenous rights holders that will drive the economy forward, to the extent we can get moving on the parts as they become ready, rather than waiting for the entirety of the package, which in some instances could take a number of years, I think we have an opportunity and in fact an obligation to move as quickly as possible on the components of the partnership that are ready. So my instinct is to move quickly on the parts that are ready, but continue to encourage the proponents behind each element of the project to continue their work to the extent that there may be a real project that can add to the overall clean energy mix that will help power our economy for the next generation.
Your Premier, Tim Houston, wants federal help for Wind West, but we've heard of other big energy ideas like tidal power come and go in Nova Scotia. Is Wind West something you could see the federal government spending money on?
It'll depend on the specifics of a given project. We have significant support in place for existing wind projects across the province today, including many of which that have, at least to some extent, Indigenous equity participation. But we believe in the offshore sector, and I actually find this is a point of alignment as between Tim's government and the federal government, in that we have actually been working for a number of years now, not only to strengthen the interties between Atlantic provinces for the transmission of that energy, but actually to set up a regulatory framework that would make it possible to build offshore wind off the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It was just a few days ago, in fact, there was a joint decision taken to designate certain areas for potential offshore wind development. When we see the alignment of the two governments, that creates a perfect storm, so to speak, that may help projects like this get off the ground. Now, the hope, of course, is that this is not simply an opportunity for governments to fund these projects, but to create certainty within the regulatory framework that will attract private investment to help grow the economy as well. We shouldn't just assume that the economy in Atlantic Canada need be driven by public investments that are foisted upon taxpayers, though there may be a role. We do want to ensure that we put a regulatory framework in place that demonstrates to private investors there's an opportunity for companies to earn profits and put people locally to work in this new and exciting industry.
Well, on that point, Premier Holt and her Natural Resources Minister both say that on their concept of extending the gas pipeline from Quebec into the region, that there is private sector interest, but they have suggested that government ownership or part ownership may be in the mix to take some of the risk out of that project. What are the chances of the federal government taking an ownership stake in that or in other projects?
Look, it'll depend on the exact details of projects that have not yet been formally submitted. I've seen some commentary in the news that had the provincial government in Quebec through the premier not necessarily voicing an endorsement of the project, but saying he needed to see more. So when the proponents have not yet come together to say this is in fact a specific project we would like to have approved through the process imagined by the Build Canada Act, it's hard for me to say with certainty that the federal government should or should not take an equity stake. Obviously, there have been examples in the past where federal governments have leaned in to take equity stakes in projects before. The Trans Mountain example would perhaps be the most recent. But all of those conversations will depend heavily on the details of the actual proposals that come in. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of those proposals, but the goal is not necessarily for the federal government in all instances to become a part owner of these projects. More often, the right outcome will be that we create the environment that will incentivize investment, that will allow private companies to set up, to succeed, and to employ people in the region. But we don't want to write off the possibility that certain kinds of investments may be required for particular projects to make them viable if we believe the long-term interests of Canadians will be served. So long story short, it'll depend on the details as they come in, and I'm certainly not going to prejudge them before project applications have been formally submitted.
Okay, Minister Sean Fraser, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's it for us this week. Let us know what you think of the Eastern Energy Partnership. Our email is thehouse@cbc.ca. Next week, our summer specials continue. David Thurton will explore whether Canada can meet its climate goals. Our crew on the house is Kristen Everson, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and Victoria Valido. Technical production by Miguel Plant, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Thanks also to Cindy Grant and everyone else at CBC New Brunswick who lent a hand this week to put the show together. I'm Jacques Poitras in Fredericton. Thanks for listening.